Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start the public input session this evening. In deciding the format to set up for tonight's meeting, I attempted to follow, at least to some degree, the same sort of scenario that was used last year in the budget development process. Last year's reductions in state education aid have resulted in fewer dollars budgeted for students, programs, and staffing. The current budget, the one we're operating under this year, as you're well aware, is a little bit over 3% lower than the previous year, 2009-10. In this current year, all programs were retained that were in place the previous year. And the district had to work through a $1.1 million shortfall in revenue. The budget preparation process for the coming 2011-12 school year will be even more difficult. This year we're looking at a $1.8 million deficit when we look at our revenues in comparison to the past. We have been moving ahead rather cautiously to ensure that reductions that are made this year will minimize the negative effects on students and programs. But I think it's important to understand that this year there will be additional reductions in staff and there will be reductions in program. New York State faces an enormous financial shortfall. Since educational support, state aid, makes up a large part of the state budget, it is a fact that state aid reductions will result in deeper cuts than last year. As I mentioned in a previous discussion about budget development, poorer rural school districts fare far worse than districts of greater wealth. The wealth index that factors into the aid formulas results in an inequitable distribution of state monies. Wealthier districts are hurt far less than rural districts. Additionally, since state aid makes up a much smaller percentage of the revenue in wealthier districts, cuts in state aid have a much lesser effect. We have to talk also about minimal increases in the tax levy in those districts, because in wealthier districts, minimal tax levy increases result in far greater revenues. For example, you're probably quite aware that a 1% increase in the tax levy in our school district raises only slightly over $107,000. What we're doing here tonight is we're going to just give you an idea of where those revenue projections are at this point. We will review the gap between the increased budget estimate and revenue shortfall, review potential areas of budget reductions, and obtain your input. As I stated previously, the situation regarding state aid is not good. We're looking at approximately $1.8 million in reduced funding for the coming year over the current year. In terms of federal funding, there are further reductions there as well. You'll probably recall that last year there were federal funds provided to restore jobs. And those are considered to be federal ARRA funds. And for this district, they approximated $741,000. Later on in the budget process, there was a creation of an education job funds, which the district had an opportunity to use either in the current school year or to carry them over to the coming school year. In Jordan Elbridge, those funds were not used because those funds became available much later in the budget process and had not been considered as part of the revenue pact. So we will still roll over that money, which is approximately $620,000 in federal funding, into the coming school year, which means we have an approximate shortfall of $120,000 over the previous year. There's also a reduction in grant funding, especially in the areas of special education, IDEA. You're looking at approximately in those two areas $199,000. Once again, we take a hit in our revenues from the sales tax. If we went back to the previous year, you can see that we had approximately $300,000 in revenues. That was halved for the current year, which brings it to about $150,000. For next year, it will be $75,000, and in the following year, it will disappear completely. We also know that there are certain areas of our budget that are bound to grow. The growth of salaries, health insurance, unemployment benefits, and pension cost increases, we estimate would increase our budget somewhere in the neighborhood of 3%. As a result, the funding gap that we're looking at is once again somewhere in that $1.8 million range. I think it's important to consider a contingent budget when we discuss the way we're working through this budget process. Education Law Section 1716 says that all expenses necessary are included in the proposed budget. No separate propositions may exist for budget items in a contingent budget. Education Law 2023, Board of Education is to adopt the contingent budgets when voters have refused to adopt or approve a budget. There can be a budget revote, or the district may choose to run a contingency budget immediately after a defeat. If a budget is defeated twice by the voters, then it is mandatory that a contingent budget be adopted. The overall increase in the contingent budget, with certain exclusion, is capped at the lesser of 120% of the national CPI, or 4%. The national CPI at this point is 1.92%, so 120% of that would be lower than the 4% amount. And that is the amount that we would be capped at for a contingent budget. At our board meeting of last week, the Board of Education discussed to some extent issues and areas of the budget that we might consider for reductions. I think a similar approach could be used this evening. So for those of you who were at the meeting last week, this will be somewhat repetitious, but I think it's important to consider those areas of the budget that we have been looking at. Nothing at this point has been decided. Your input is welcome and valued. I think we need to discuss the issues as best we can where they will have minimal impact. We have looked at staffing reductions in all areas of the staffing. We have looked at administrative reductions, reductions in the instructional staff, and reductions in non-instructional staff. We have to consider class size considerations. If we reduce staff, in many instances, class size averages will increase. So I tried to give you an idea of where the class size averages are now. If we look at our K2 student population, class size averages tend to hover around 19. In grades 3 through 5, they are in the 21 to 22 range. And I pulled out English classes as an example. Obviously, at the secondary level, there is a much greater spread in average class sizes. There's a greater range. But for the most part, if we look at grades 6 through 8 in English, they average about 22 students per class. And in grade 9 through 12 English, they average about 16 pupils per class. We have also talked about implementing minimum class sizes. That's a tough one, and as I explained last week at our meeting, you can't set absolute lower levels. We need to meet our requirements to provide students with a continuation of those programs that they begin. We are talking about a minimum class size at approximately 15, with exceptions made where necessary. We are talking about looking at reducing elective offerings. You saw the class sizes in English at the high school level average around 16. We have at least 10 different English electives that are available for 12th grade students. I've listed them here for you to take a look at. Some of the goals and objectives of those courses may be very similar. So we might need to look at, for example, AP courses versus other college credit granting courses. We are talking about looking at reducing the number of extracurricular activities that may be available to our students. In doing that, we have to do that in a planned, organized way. We need to look at what is the student enrollment in those areas, what is the value added in those areas, and decide if there are some areas that are undersubscribed, if maybe we could offer them on an every other year basis or something of that nature. I have put down here increased secondary teacher assignments. That is something that we would have to discuss with the Jordan Elbridge Teachers Association. Those are terms and conditions of employment, but the current contract does not prohibit increasing the number of sections. We need to, as I said earlier, reevaluate some of our electives in the enrichment area. We need to consider those 3 different programs which are available to our students. Other possible budget reduction areas would include negotiations with labor unions to lower costs. Eliminate or curtail conferences and field trips. Reduce BOCES services in areas where we may get less aid in the future. There is some talk at the state level of eliminating BOCES aid for those areas that do not directly impact on students. We may need to look at charging back for community use of facilities. The vast majority of our overtime work is provided to allow access to the community for school facilities for various functions. Obviously, that's a very difficult thing to do. The school district is the hub of the community. The public relies on it to a great extent, but if we go to a contingent budget, that would be something that we would be forced into doing because it's a requirement of law. We're taking a serious look at combining the 2 libraries in this building to provide a comprehensive library system for all students, 4 through 8. And we need to take a look at equipment replacement plans to make sure that we're not ignoring them completely, but at the same time, only making those replacements when they're absolutely needed. We have taken a long, hard look at the athletic budget. At our last meeting, the Board of Education discussed the possibility of eliminating or not filling the positions of assistant coaches. That's something we will be revisiting as we put together the final 11-12 budget. We could reduce offerings. We could eliminate a modified program, reduce coaching positions, restructure teams. I know that at least in football that has already taken place. We've taken a modified team of 7, 8, 9, a varsity team of 10, 11, 12, and from my understanding that has worked out quite well. In pursuing that with neighboring school districts and my fellow superintendents, there is not a lot of support for that at this time. So it probably wouldn't be something that we could do immediately unless other school districts join in. You obviously can't have athletic teams that have nobody to play against. We could reduce the number of contests. There's several ways you can do that. We could eliminate postseason play, or we could limit competitions to nearby schools. Most of these issues are issues that have been discussed in the past. It has not been necessary to implement them. However, I know we are going to have to look at some of these as we proceed this year. We looked at the music department. It was a contentious issue not too long ago in terms of the resignation of a teacher and whether or not we were going to fill that position as a part-time position, a full-time position, or not at all. We have elected to fill that position for this year as a part-time position, but we're still looking at the music department staffing to see if there are ways that we can more efficiently use existing staff. Once again, no decisions have been made, but there are areas of the music department extracurriculars that we need to take a look at. We've looked at the possibility of eliminating department chairs and team leaders. These are considered extracurricular in our contract, but they are more instructionally oriented than they are student oriented.
I missed a line.
We need to look at ways to reduce substitute costs. Substitute teacher costs are extremely high in this district, and I think that's an area that we need to look at, seeing if there are ways that we can reduce that absenteeism. We have discussed seriously the elimination of midday UPK transportation. It's a fairly high-cost item. It is not reimbursed through any revenue stream, and it has not shown to be a significant factor in the number of students who participate in the UPK program. It is my understanding that prior to midday transportation, we had somewhere in the 47 to 48 students involved in the UPK program, and now we have somewhere in the 52, 53 students involved in that program. We need to continue in those areas that we have implemented to reduce costs. We need to take a look at our group busing, transportation pickup, and drop-off schedule, and make sure that those things are not impetuously changed, which could cause us to increase costs. We need to continue to look at alternative scheduling of our staff to reduce overtime costs, and we need to utilize BOCES services, particularly in the area of technology. At this point, I would like to entertain questions. If your question is something that's relatively simple, that I feel comfortable in, I will answer it right away. Otherwise, we will take down your questions, and we will get those questions published so you can have a response to them.
I find it hard to believe that class sizes in the high school are 16
Say again?
The classes in the high school are an average of 16 students per
The
class.
current, if I look at the current class-by-class population, add them all up and divide by the number of sections, it's 16.
Wow, that's low. That's
Yes.
really low.
See, and one of the reasons we need to look at those sorts of things is because it doesn't mean we have to give up any of those courses. We could do them on an every other semester basis or an every other year basis, have higher enrollment in the class, yet students would still have significant opportunities to take electives.
I know the district has kind of a mission statement, academic-wise, but do we have goals that are set, short-term, long-term goals that can help answer some of these questions, like do we want SUNY English, or do we want AP, do we want, some of those selections? Do we have kind of a vision of where we want to be and what our students need and where they need to go to get there?
I have not come across anything that is specifically is policy setting or overreaching in terms of an overall plan in terms of what we should provide. I think Jordan Elbridge has been very fortunate that the public has, in my opinion, from my experience, overwhelmingly supported budgets. Despite the fact that the tax levy and the tax rate is relatively high, the people in this community have supported budgets, and from what I've looked at, like 2-to-1 margin. So I think that the money has been there to do these things without questioning, challenging what is the best way for a student to get either college credit or advanced placement credit. Is it a SUPA type course? Is it a community college type course, dual credit sort of thing, or is it an AP course? And I think those are issues we need to look at when we go through the next couple of weeks and say, all right, where are we moving first? Let's suppose we're going to look at eliminating AP courses. I need to get information on what percentage of students who we have enrolled in AP courses earn 3s, 4s, and 5s on the AP exam. It doesn't mean that that's the only reason we offer that course. But I don't know that we have an overriding philosophy in terms of those areas.
Would it make deciding some of these issues, some of these concerns, a little bit clearer, even for the public to understand, the parents and the board, the staff, everyone, to clearly know where we want to go and then make these more intricate decisions if we go in that direction?
We've tried to do that to an extent at least in terms of our budget development process. One of the first things I tried to do is to implement a process where we survey the staff to get a sense for where the staff are. Those are the people that are meeting with our children on a daily basis. Those are the people that took part in the process of either recommending or implementing new course offerings. And so what I try to do is I try to say, where are we now? What sorts of things have we established as our objectives in the past? List them in priority order. How well have we done? What are our major goals for next year in priority order? It was a new experience for people. I think they had a difficult time embracing it, so the information received wasn't overwhelmingly used to say exactly where we're going to go next. But it was shared among the administrators, and the administrators did, in my opinion, an outstanding job of stepping up to the plate and saying, if we've got to cut, these are areas that we would recommend we cut first. And so we tried to do that, but is there an overriding plan? No. Should there be? Ideally, yes. I think what has happened is, especially in the last 2 years, we're operating under a different scenario. Last year was bad. We reduced 18.4 positions last year. You know, we're looking at reducing probably that many again for next year. The year after is supposed to be worse. I don't know what we would do when we look at the 2012-13 school year. There's not going to be a lot to cut. The governor says we can do it. Tighten your belts, use your fund balance, and you don't even have, he's saying we don't even have to reduce staff, we don't have to reduce programs. Well, if any of you have the answers to this, I certainly would welcome you to share them with us, because it's not an easy thing to answer. Yes, sir.
If we look at the last 5 years and next year, what is our cost per student?
I couldn't answer that for you except to do some very basic math and say, well, what are we going to determine the cost? Are we going to take the total budget and divide it by the number of kids? We could do that. I don't know if it gives you a very useful figure.
In the past 5 years, you got actual cost. And divide that by the number of students, not budget.
Actual cost.
Actual.
Sure. Could you do? Yes, we could do that.
You have a budget figure for next year, and divide that by the projected number of students that will be here in 2011 and 12. And that'll give us a per student cost. And I'd like to know what that figure is.
I think we can probably provide that. I'm not.
I think that's on the school report card, right?
I'm sorry.
Is it on the school report card every year?
It doesn't include all costs.
It doesn't include what?
It doesn't include all costs.
And in some places I've been, they've excluded certain amounts. You know, do you factor out, I'll give you, do you factor out special education costs, or do you add them all up and just do an average? When you get that result, what do you want to do with it? Because a lot of times when you collect data, unless you really know and have in your mind how you're going to use it, it may or may not be covered.
In part B, what is your projection of the student enrollment for 2011? What is the projected enrollment?
The projected enrollment right now is not, we don't have kindergarten numbers. Right now our kindergarten numbers are still down, but we're not anticipating a significant decrease in numbers. When we look at elementary, I get a little nervous because if you decrease students and increase class size at the elementary level, it has a larger impact because you don't spread them over as big an area. And so, you know, you can take a look at it and you say, well, do we want an average class size of 19, or do we want an average class size of 25? Well, I think most people say, well, we want the 19. But we're going to have to look at those things, and so it's hard for me to answer your question because it depends what you're going to do with it. we can't set a number. You can't really set a maximum class size number or a minimum class size number. But I think you've got to set targets, and my goal would be primary, early elementary, you want to hover down around the 20 per class range. As you start to creep up a little bit more, you can start to increase it by 2 students per class or whatever. But I think you're going to see down the road, not necessarily for 2011-12, you're going to see significant increases in class sizes. You're going to see significant reductions in course offerings. You're going to see significant reductions in athletic and extracurricular offerings. And I think everybody needs to be very concerned, because it's not something that's just temporary. And when I started this monologue, I guess what I was trying to get at was, I don't know what the scenario here was last year, but I think there are still people thinking that this problem is going to go away. Then a little while down the road, it's going to get better, and we'll be back to where we were. It's not going to happen. The situation in the national level isn't good. Certainly the situation in our state level is not good. And once again, if there are easy answers, I haven't found them. Now we can collect all the data in the world, but unless we get a sense of how we're going to use that, what we did 5 years ago, my opinion is, will have very little value for us in terms of what we're going to do 2 years from now, or even now. And I would only ask you, I got to remind you, I don't hear well, especially in these kinds of settings. My hearing aids don't work real well, so you got to yell at me. I won't get upset.
I have a question. I know that you've spoken with the administration, and they've given their input as far as the programming goes, or what cuts and things like that. Have you, I know I've offered for you to meet with the band boosters. Have you set up a time to meet with the band boosters, the sports boosters, and the recreation, the community council?
I have not.
To discuss with them what they're able to offer our students to kind of help with the budget. Like, for example, you know, would the band boosters be able to fund some of these programs to help lessen the cost that you need in a budget?
The answer to that is yes. We've talked about that internally, but we haven't gotten to the point. We haven't, for example, we had a slide up there that talked about drumline.
Right.
We haven't decided to cut drumline.
And I understand that, but at what point, you have a meeting tonight, you have a meeting March 26th, March 29th, and then you have a meeting April 6th to adopt the budget. At what point are you going to meet with the boosters? As a matter of fact, I know we have a booster meeting Monday night, Bruce?
Yes.
The 14th at 7 o'clock at the high school. I would think you, as well as Mary Madonna, as well as the Board of Education, would want to come and meet with them to see what they have to offer.
To the extent that we could, I think that's a wonderful suggestion. What I would say to all of you out there, depending upon how many groups there are or whatever, if you have suggestions, for example, drumline, color guard is not a big ticket item. It's not tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If I remember right, if you take each of those, I don't know which one, but I'll pick one. It's only $300 difference. Drumline is $7,600.
Right.
Color guard is $7,900. Is that a big sum of money? No. No, it's not. Should we deprive our kids?
Wait a minute, sorry, I gotta defer to that. I happen to know what the salaries are for the winter guard, and it's $2,500, $4,500 for salaries, and $800 the district gave them for equipment. That doesn't reach your total.
It doesn't include transportation either.
I'm sorry. Yeah, then you're maybe correct. Transportation. Okay. However, you're right. It is a small ticket item, and that's a line that you skipped on the slide where it said elimination of winter drumline and winter guard. Okay, we kind of like skipped that line. That's the one line out of the whole slideshow that you didn't read, and it's near and dear to my heart. You know, my daughter was a guard girl. My son is in drumline now. If those programs are eliminated, what are those kids supposed to do in those winter months? How are we supposed to support the marching band and keep them learning? And Mary Jo's exactly right. we are willing to support these programs and have offered the opportunity to come help find a way to do it. Nobody comes and talks to us.
I don't mean to interrupt. Understand, you guys in specific, you have an executive board member on the school board who speaks along with myself in defense of any program. I mean, I can tell you right now that this gentleman's sitting here for something totally different that is equally near and dear to his heart.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have anything to do with winter drum and winter color guard or marching band.
Or even sports.
Or even sports. Okay, so everybody in this room has something that is near and dear to their heart that is going to be a difficult thing for us to overcome. So yes, as board members / marching band supporters, have we had the conversation about what the band boosters can do? Absolutely 100%.
And like I said, Connie, I'm not just saying the band because I'm here for the theater,
I
I'm
know
here for
that,
the sport.
and I'm just,
I'm asking him, as well as the boosters, to make time in the next month to have public meetings with the sports boosters, the community council, the theater program. I mean, that's just showing your willingness to work more with this budget. That's all I'm asking.
And we've discussed that, we have discussed it. We need to figure out what the budget numbers are first, so that we can actually tell you guys, okay, this is how much you possibly are gonna have. Is it feasible for you? We're not there yet.
Well, we can't lob this funding either. The school district can't solicit funds for donations either.
But I'm not asking them to, I'm just asking for us to communicate more amongst the community council and amongst the sports boosters and I mean, that's all I'm asking. I mean, if that's just to kind of see where you guys are at and where we're at, I mean, at least you guys would have a better understanding, as well as we, as a community, would have a better understanding of what we need to do and how much more money we, as a parent, would need to come up and fund. I mean, if, for example, if my daughter and son want to play in the community council, and we're going to charge to use the facilities, we as a parent need to know how much, I know as a single parent, need to know how much I'm gonna have to increase, you know, for baseball or basketball. I mean,
Absolutely. All that.
that's all I'm asking, is
And no one
just
is
more
trying to keep
communication,
that
that's
from
it.
anybody. There's, those numbers just aren't there yet right now. Am I wrong? They're just not.
At what
we're not
point are we
there
gonna
yet.
have numbers, not till April 6th?
What I wanted to do, my goal was to use last week's meeting with the board to get some sense from the board as representatives of the community who will adopt the budget to lead us, push us, whatever you want to call it, in a direction that says, we think these are, I like to make it easy. There's the must-do things. There's certain things we must do in this budget. We don't have any choice. It's either required by law, it's required by, the requirements for graduation or what have you. We have to do that stuff. Then there's the should-do stuff. Should we provide our children with an opportunity to participate in athletics? Yes. No question about that. Music? Yes. Other extracurricular activities? Yes. Debate? Theater? I mean, you could go on and on and on. Should we? Yes. Then there are some of those things that I say would be the could-do stuff. It would be nice if. Well, I'll tell you right now, the could-do stuff is out. As best I can tell. And if anybody has an idea for fixing that, please let me know. If you want to know, should we talk to each other? Yes. If, for example, if you said, can we leave drumline and color guard alone if we can either get volunteer leaders or we can raise money to pay our directors and our people that work with the kids? Yes. Why would we want to stop that from happening? We want those things to remain in place. But we have to also deal with the fact that everybody wants their stuff intact, whatever it is. Do I want to cut modified sports? Absolutely not. I think modified students need those kinds of activities more than any other group. But we might want to take a look at, go back to middle school education of 20, 30 years ago and say, most middle school educators would have said interscholastic athletics isn't the best kind of involvement to have for middle school kids. Intramural programs that involve just about everybody at those grade levels would be far superior. But we are in a society that doesn't look upon it like that. We like athletic competition. My own kids were involved in that. So I understand, but those are issues that are not gonna continue as they have in the past, unless we find alternative ways to fund them. As a school administrator, superintendent, I was always kind of a purist. My attitude was, if it's done in schools, it should be paid for through the revenue streams that we have. I'm not one that likes to have kids who want to do drumline out selling candy bars when they could be participating in drumline or something like that. In our world, though, that's not my way of doing it. It doesn't work. I hate fundraisers, but frankly, if you didn't have fundraisers, you'd probably lose a lot of things that kids want and need. So I back off. I tell you what I think, but I say, then you say, well, if we raise funds and we can support drumline and color guard, can we keep it? Sure.
There's also another caveat.
But I don't think we're gonna, excuse me, but I don't think we're gonna raise $500,000 to keep everything the way it is.
I know, I understand, I just want to know if there's gonna be more of that communication, that's all.
When do you expect to have a specific budget that details the specific cuts that they also?
We are already starting to work on that line-by-line budget. After we work with the Board of Education, we continue to work with the Board of Education and the administration in our Budget Development Committee. I want to receive input from people, so even if you don't speak tonight, if you think of something, get it on an email, get it to us so we can consider it. Administratively, we now have to sit down and make the decisions. But there's still going to have to be a lot of discussion, because if I say we're cutting assistant coaches and modified sports, well, is that locked in stone? No, but it's going to, if it's in a first draft of the budget, we better make sure that we understand where the priorities were, to go back to the question in terms of, do you have a plan? And we better be able to say why this is less higher priority than this.
Maybe a better question would be, what is the calendar of events that happen between now and the public voting on the budget?
If we back off, if we go backwards from where we have to be, if I remember right, the Board of Education is scheduled to adopt the budget on April 6th.
Okay.
All right? Currently, we're planning on having another meeting for presentation to the public on March 29th.
And would that,
Right.
at that point, that would have the budget
Yes,
with whatever cuts you're proposing?
yes. So mark your calendar, March 29th. Now, should we have information for you before then? Yes. We meet next week. Should we be discussing budget and rehashing priorities and maybe come to the board with a little bit more direction in terms of where we're going? What I need to be very cautious of is we've had situations in the past, because we're a small, relatively small school district, when we start to talk about staffing cuts, it's a catch-22 situation. I think it's unconscionable for me to stand here at a meeting and tell the public that we're looking at X number of cuts in this area, that area, this area, and then we've got teachers out there who are going, that's me. I think we have an obligation to try to inform people officially prior to releasing that information to the public. But then how do you do that? How do you have a dialogue after you've made the decision? So I mean, we're going to have to make some preliminary decisions, suggestions, and then we're going to have to notify people, and it's my goal to notify everyone. My original goal is I got to notify them before April 1. But now I think about it, and I said, well, if I'm meeting with you people on March 29th, that means I better back it from there, and I better get this information out to people prior to March 29th. Because I mean, people have a right to know whether they're on the block or not. So the next major piece is March 29th. We are working with this stuff constantly to try to decide how we can get there. 1.8 million is a hard number to come up with.
Taylor, do we know yet, I mean, with not only our cost reductions, do we know yet where BOCES is going as far as courses that they will have to cut back? Where, my question leads into, I teach at Liverpool, I teach the DPI programs. if students don't have the opportunity to go to college after school, they enter into what could be an adult program offered through BOCES. The problem with that is that the funding that they could get as a grant from New York State is only given in areas that show potential growth, whether it be HVAC, nursing, that sort of thing. The programs that we may cut or that BOCES will cut, are they aligned with what New York State will fund as, say, adult education if students can't go to college but yet want to take advantage of?
I don't think that alignment exists, no.
Okay. So, but with the courses that we have to fine tune, do we know what BOCES is gonna limit or cut within their, maybe that's too broad of a question.
BOCES has not, we have not had discussions with BOCES where they indicated that they are cutting any programs. I haven't heard that at this point.
The handout shows what they were reduced, staff, but not.
No.
As you're looking at staffing and cuts in staffing, have you given any consideration to job sharing, perhaps at the secondary level? You might have two teachers in maybe social studies, I'm just throwing that out there, social studies or English that would be happier to work half a day, and maybe they're people with young children that would like to be home half a day and keep a job, still allowing you to eliminate a position, but they're sharing that job at the high school, or they're sharing that job 7 through 12. Have you considered that at all?
I don't think we've considered it specifically in any specific case, but certainly I think the whole job market is going to change. You know, we talked at our board meeting here last week, and I didn't like this because we were talking about, all of a sudden we were talking about French. And I think if I'm a French teacher now, I get all nervous because you're talking about French. And we shouldn't have been talking about French, we could have been talking about anything.
Well, let me just rephrase it to secondary teachers then, because I think it would be easier to do at the secondary level than elementary level, to share. Someone teaches the morning classes, someone teaches the afternoon classes. Maybe they'd be happy to do that than be out of a job or have to go back to subbing. And maybe not, but
well, frankly, that could be a very valid suggestion. And if people were in the situation where, I just think about other costs, benefits, health insurance. Maybe if you're a part-time teacher, it may even save the district money in that you don't need to provide health insurance benefits. Now, if it costs you the other side of that, then I would say, no, I don't think that would be a good idea. If I have to hire 2 people and pay half-time and then pay double health insurance benefits, it wouldn't be cost-effective. But on the other hand, if you hire 2 people half-time and didn't pay any health insurance benefits, it could be very cost-effective for the district. So is that a possibility? Sure, it's a possibility. Would we discuss that? Yes. Should we discuss other ways? I mean, you've read in the newspapers about school districts who have give-backs in terms of freezing of salaries or not taking certain increments or whatever. Can that save jobs? Yes, it can save jobs. You know, if you have a $8 million salary going out and you look at 2%, if you save 2% on $8 million, if I did my math right, it's $160,000. Well, $160,000 could probably save at least 2 jobs. So should we look at that? Yes. Will those things be discussed with the union leadership? Yes. Can we force those on the union? No.
How does seniority work?
Nor do I think should we, but.
How would seniority work with that?
I'm sorry, Frank?
Seniority. How would seniority work with that?
What do you mean?
With teachers, if they're, I'm sorry, but teachers, I understand the whole half-time thing, but you're not gonna get a lot of people in this day and age that are going to say, okay, I'm going to half-time, because nobody's gonna want to lose
Yeah.
their seniority.
Well,
It's really competitive at this point
But
across the country.
I guess it depends upon whether you would ask me, are we going to count on that? No. Is it something we could look at? Sure. We could offer it to somebody. Somebody might say, well, gee, you know, I can afford to give up my half of my job, and
But then you'd have to juggle all this.
You could
and
stay.
run around and-
certainly nothing we could force.
Do you guys have a feeling that you'll be able to have positive progressive talks with the union? Have you gotten there yet?
My experience in working with the union leadership here is that the union leadership here is very willing to discuss, to meet with me, to talk about issues that we have. We don't always see eye to eye, but we deal with each other respectfully. I understand the situation. You know, I was a union leader once myself, and you know, I never had to deal with quite this magnitude of problem, but I do know that the whole situation is changing tremendously. I mean, unions are giving concessions now that wouldn't have been even thought of 30 years ago, for sure. But I think the relationship with the union is a positive one. I think the union is certainly willing to discuss, but where it will lead, I don't know. Yes.
What about cutting, well, like you said about the teachers, what about administration? Maybe having them doing part-time instead of taking away from the children learning in the classroom. Maybe cutting, you know, half-day for administration people, rather than taking away from the classroom time of instruction.
It's something that could be considered.
So another question. Has scheduling been completed at the high school level
No.
to decide what classes the students
Not
need?
yet.
Kids are just signing up right now. We typically don't begin scheduling until the end of March.
In my district that I work in, it was done earlier so that they could look at the budget and see what the kids needed with the class minimum of 15, because we have similar requirements. You have to have a minimum amount of students. So how can you decide which electives or which courses to cut if you don't know what the students already need for scheduling?
I know what students are signing up for. 8th grade is just starting next week, signing up, so we need to know what our 9th graders, but you can predict. I can predict how many sections I'll need, because I know 9th graders need English, global, so I can predict where we are. I will tell you, the numbers he gave you with English, average of 16, is true. So when he asked, where is there wiggle room, we have a lot of electives at the high school. In English alone, I have OCC, SUPA, AP English, 8 different senior electives. So when I look at numbers, I say, without even having a schedule built yet, what kids are requesting, I have a large area of wiggle room in some departments.
So I have 2 questions. What do other school districts, our size, what do they offer in English, because you're using that? What do they offer? Have you looked at their offerings? Because it seems as if that list, there's a lot of repeats, I agree. And that is an incredibly low student-teacher ratio. The second question is, if you haven't done scheduling, you're kind of playing a guessing game. You can predict, but you don't know for sure.
I just went to a scheduling workshop at BOCES, and I don't know what district you work for, but most districts do their scheduling in the spring, and some, in fact, don't do it till summer, after budgets are passed and they know what they're working with.
At the high school level?
Yes.
One of the discussions that we did have was, question arose, should we have students at the high school level sign up for next year's course load? And I don't necessarily like that way of doing it. What I said, what I was going to require first was, if you have an elective course for which there is not a standard curriculum, before we decide whether we're offering the course, I want to see a copy of the curriculum, and I want to see a copy of the final examination. I want to make sure that we're setting academic standards high enough so that we're not just filling up kids' programs with what I'll call fluff. I mean, we get criticized because students graduate from school and don't have necessary math skills or English writing skills and so forth. Well, I'm not saying that a course in theater can't provide that, but unless I can see the curriculum and evaluate that curriculum to make sure we have some academic rigor, I have a little bit of problem with that. So I want to make sure that if we're going to offer elective courses, that when students finish that course, they have a body of knowledge and skills that are valuable to them afterwards.
I agree.
That's, to me, more important than having 8 to 10 electives. Sometimes more is less. And so I think we need to take a look at those things and make sure that just because we have more electives doesn't mean we have a richer curriculum. It doesn't mean we don't, but it doesn't mean we do. So that's another thing that we're looking at. And I will get those curricula, and I will look at them, and I will look to see how the curricula match the exams. And then will I make the decision? No, but I will work with staff to help make that decision. I mean, certainly if we were going to reduce the number of offerings in English, it might be helpful if we had some English teachers involved.
I agree.
You know, so, but we're not there yet until we collect more information. But as we said, we're running out of time too.
March, I know.
I mean, we can't be going on forever, but we're changing the system so drastically that we need to just try to do the best we can to discuss it, because it's not going to look the same. It's not going to pass us by and Albany is going to come out with a big chunk of money and say, you know, just kidding, here's all the money you're going to get. Not going to happen. State's broke.
Can I add to that a little bit? It's hard to compare school district size by student to school district size by student and say, okay, let's make sure we have the same offerings, because the bottom line is the tax levies aren't the same. So the monies that you receive from the taxpayers aren't the same. All of that isn't the same, so you can't necessarily just look at student size, you have to look at the demographic of the area too.
I was asking for the comparison because of colleges require certain things.
Right.
When you send a transcript, they want certain courses. So I'm just saying, have we looked at what colleges really want from our students? And keep those courses instead of guessing,
And that's
oh, well, I think
different.
this is the one that we should keep, or which ones do the students really want and really enjoy, and what are they getting the most out of?
I think
That's my point. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not.
So that's a
you
whole
know.
different question, yeah?
And I think that's a critical role that our guidance counselors need to help fill,
Yeah.
at least.
And that's why I'm.
They should be the liaisons with the students as they enter into the next stage of their lives, whether it's career, whether it's college. And that's why I said, we need to look at AP test scores. If we're offering AP courses, how are our kids doing? You know, you can go on the internet and you can see that, you know, if you go back, you can look at, I don't know, 2008, 2009 I looked at, and if you look at English AP, it looked to me like about 58 to 60% of kids nationwide are scoring 3 or better. Now, does that mean that's where we need to be? Not necessarily, but if we're regularly at some much lower level, we have to consider why that is. Are we being less rigorous in our instruction, or is there something else entering into this here? So, and once again, it's not just academic credit for college courses that's important, but it's certainly a piece of it.
Well,
I think that's where.
First, that student to dollar ratio, are we getting the most for our students that we possibly can with our course offerings?
For years now, we've heard about what they call a value-added concept, right? You put money into something, what do you get back? And we talk about it, but we really don't go out and gather the information, the data that we need to do that. We haven't been forced into doing that. I think now we have to do that. We have to look at assigning our staff efficiently and effectively. Right? We can't have people who maybe come into contact with 40 kids in the course of a high school day. You know, the typical high school student load, and I think, from most of my experiences, is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of around 100, sometimes more, sometimes 125 students, but not 40s and 50s. So we have to look at those things, and we have to make sure that we prepare our staff to fill the roles that we're going to see for them 2, 3, and 4 years from now, because it will be different. Yes?
On March 29th, at the public informational meeting, and when you guys present this budget to the public, We all know that there's currently a poor public perception of the school district and what's gone on. How are you gonna market the budget so that people are going to vote for it? Because I think that's gonna be a key factor here, is to market it. I can tell you, back in 1981-82, North Syracuse School District, we had nothing all year. No marching band, no theater, nothing, because of the whole budget marketing. It was awful as a senior. And my fear is to just not get this thing approved, and we're gonna go into contingency, and then there's all kinds of rules and all kinds of stuff. I'm just curious what your plan is for marketing the budget, because that is a key piece this year especially.
Well, I'll be direct and probably a little blunt. Our marketing skills haven't been too good lately.
No, they haven't.
Touche. And it's hard, it's very difficult, because there are so many distractions in the course of a day, week, and month, and it hasn't been an easy environment to do that. There is not a lot of credibility. There's a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of concern. In the short time that I've been here, I've been challenged. I've been more than challenged in some cases. But, you know, when you're in the business for 40-some years, you kind of get a little bit thick-skinned. But when you consider yourself an educator and you care about kids, I think the key thing is we've got to realize why we're all here, or why we all should be here. Whether we're here for those purposes or not, I don't know. I can't judge. But we need to be here to provide the best possible program we can for the students in this community.
And that fact is what has to get out to everybody. That's the thing, and that's my fear, is that people are just gonna vote no because they're gonna vote no because they wanna vote no.
Well, let me tell you what I see happening. Number one, I am not the type of person that would recommend to the Board of Education that we put up a bare bones budget, less than bare bones budget, just in hopes that if it's low enough, we can pass it. I won't do that. It's not fair to the kids, all right? If we were to adopt a contingent budget, it's probably not even high enough to where we really want to provide the programming that we want for our kids. What I have to try to figure out with the help of the board and you people is, where do we stand with tax levy increases? First of all, and I said this before, the tax on True in this district is, as far as I can tell, higher than any surrounding district. So the tax burden is already high. Now, I also said that it seems to me that the average margin for passing a budget seems to be almost 2-to-1 in many instances over the past several years. So the support has been there for the kids, for the administration, for the staff, for the board, but we've lost a lot of that.
This is a different year, for sure.
So I think probably at this point the only thing we have in common that all of us hopefully truly care about are the kids. So we've got to take a look at what we can put together. You have to be kept as well informed as we can possibly do, and I'm still wrestling with the whole staffing thing because I'm not sure how we're going to work through that. But there will be cuts, and we have to make sure that we do the least amount of damage. Do we put up with it? Please don't take any of these, run back to the newspaper. You know, if we take a 5% increase in the tax levy out to the public, would they support that? I don't know. Do we take a 2%? Do we take a 0%? And I think a lot of that will have to do with how it's interpreted in the line item by line item figures.
The thing is, I think, as a joke, I'm just kind of saying as a joke, at this point you could almost go out and say, we're going to cut your taxes in half, and people would still vote no, just because they want to vote no.
Well,
that was kind of a joke, but I guess my point is it's all going to be how it's presented. You need to think about who's going to present it, how they present it, and who is liked the most. You know, about...
Well, I don't have...
It's just so important.
I'm going to rely a lot on the Board of Education to help me with that because I don't have any silver bullet.
Right.
All right? All I can do is try to be honest, straightforward, and explain to people why we made decisions we made.
Larry, we talked about making sure that the community and respect, when we sit in board meetings, I think there are times that we need to be a lot more thorough in an explanation as to what we're voting on, or when the board's voting on a salary, contracted salary increase, for instance, where it came from, why it's there. So that at that moment, there's no question why we're voting on it, or if there's a decision that's been tabled or hasn't been voted on at all, making sure that it's crystal clear so that from that board meeting for 2 weeks later, in between those 2 weeks, the community's not going rampant with, they did this and they did that and they didn't vote on this because this. There are things that we question that I don't think are crystal clear enough so that the questions are answered. And when we hear that somebody else is getting another raise, we're like, just the last board meeting, we're talking about cutting back and having teachers put in for healthcare and all that stuff, but yet we're giving a raise. Well, why is that? Well, because it was maybe the last administration. Maybe it was contracted way before this, and they just have to get to it now, type stuff. These are things that I think we're seeing that are, if you can read between the lines and understand what's going on, that aren't crystal clear, and I think it's a huge communication thing that we're sitting here across from you guys, we're going, what? 10,000, whatever. Where the hell did that come from? It's making sure we understand where it came from, how it came up, that we don't miss it, that there's no fuzzy gray areas. And that's the communication thing.
One of the biggest problems I've had in this district in the 4 months that I've been here is trying to deal with all of the litigation.
Sure.
All right? And I made a statement once before, and we keep getting the whole issue of, if we didn't have these personnel issues, or if we corrected them or made them right, whatever that means, and we didn't have legal fees, we'd be okay. First of all, that's not true. It's not even close to being true. But it's a valid issue to raise. One of the biggest problems I've had is that in many cases, I find that I can't give you what I consider to be the full story.
Right.
Because if it deals with something that is involved with litigation, or potentially could be involved with litigation, then I am placing myself and the district in greater jeopardy.
We need to
I've only been here 4 months. I've been sued. Right? I didn't sue anybody, but I've been sued. And so therefore, right away, I have a little difficulty in just dumping it out there and say, look, this is the way it was. I've got to be careful that if somebody else made a decision, whether it was a year ago, 4 months ago, or yesterday, that person isn't going to come back at us and sue us. Most of the legal bills we are incurring is because we've been sued or we've been foiled. All right? And we have, yesterday, I believe we had 4 separate FOIL requests come in. Today we got served with another set of papers, which now we have to review because I think it's the same papers we got a week or 2 ago, but I can't be sure. Do I give them to an attorney to look at, or do I look at them? I'm not an attorney.
I bring it up so that, because of the question that was kind of brought back there, is it's getting the healing process in the relationship better so that we're not sitting at home saying, I'm not going to vote on that thing no matter what. It's hopefully overcoming the ignorance that may be out there as to the reality of where we're at. Because if people are pissed off at the board and the situation, legal fees, we don't understand that. We're not happy. But the reality is, we don't know. We don't have the facts. So if you look at the percentage, like you're saying, about really what the impact of our litigation is, it's nothing. In consideration of where we are at, where we have to cut budget-wise. It's such a small percentage. Hopefully this community can get past most of this and make sure, like you say, kids are number one. We got to make sure that we give the kids the best of our abilities in the times that we have and the cards that we're dealt right now. We've got to do it. But sitting back not voting or voting against it just because you're pissed off, let me tell you, you go to contingency budget, we all pay for us.
But you know, a lot of people don't
You've
know
been
that.
very patient, so
I am, and I've been in this district for 23 years, and I have never voted no on a school budget, ever, even before I had children in the district. I agree with what he says. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, and I can only see the back of your head. I agree what he says. My biggest, this part devastates me, that we're talking about all these cuts, whether it be music, whether it be theater, whether it be sports, whether it be special education, whether it be teachers' assistants, all the things that make these things happen, but yet we have all these concerns and everybody's feeling that everything is deceitful and nobody's being honest, but that very $10,000 raise happened in the form of an attachment. Okay?
That's how they all happen. That's how they've all ever happened.
And that's what, we go to the meetings,
There's usually more transparency.
we go to the meetings and we listen to what's being presented. We read what the board is approving, and it might say, see attachment something, but the attachment isn't there. We don't necessarily know what it means by this approval, whether it's going to be $10,000 or $17,000 or whatever. But I'm saying to you guys as a board and as an administration, I work for the state. I have for 30 plus years. I know how quick somebody can say you're not getting a raise. Boom, like that. Okay? And it happens and it's legal. So what happened to because of the situation, we're going to ask for a stay and temporarily suspend a $10,000, a 10%, more than 10% of the person's income raise, and you're just going to approve it. Boom. Go down the list. Yep. All in favor. Blah, blah, blah. And that's what it may not really be like that, but I'm saying to the voters, that's what it seems like, because it seems like it's all in a shell of secrecy.
That's the perception.
That is the perception, and like I said, I have never not voted yes for a budget. Never.
But 2 years ago, folks, our budget was voted down. And I fought very, very hard to get that budget approved, and we didn't have any of our current issues at hand. It's the reason why I ran for the school board. Because of those things, I want all those things to happen, and all of that stuff to come out. I know a lot of these people sitting here wanting to do the exact same thing. And I try to give out information, and then I'm accused of talking too much, whatever the case may be. Somehow, some way, at some point, somebody's not going to agree with what we say. Contracted agreements, like the situation you're talking about, if that specific scenario was a contract that was negotiated last year, and it's a contract between an administrator and the superintendent or the Board of Education.
But I'm also understanding that this person isn't even tenured yet?
It doesn't matter. That was the contract she negotiated.
But because the person isn't tenured, don't we as a district have option to question whether that's an appropriate move?
You did during that contract negotiation between.
Just question, I mean, I'm just saying this because this is what people are asking.
You have administration in place to manage those functions for you. That's what you pay your administrators for. That's what we as the Board of Education pay the
But I'm
superintendent
saying, we're talking about cutting all these important programs for the kids, and everybody thinks it's hoopty-hada to give them a 10% increase. It's wrong.
I guess the
I have
whole overall
a
picture.
concern and a couple comments. First concern is, we're gonna have the public information meeting on the 29th where we will see the budget. Is it possible to have that document published before the meeting? So, because we only have 7 days when you're turning around and the board is voting on it. I would like to be able to come to that public information meeting, at least have the day to digest what it is you're proposing, so that I can come and respond at the meeting. Because if there's things in there that the public are going to be unhappy about, you're only giving us 7 days to respond to you, And sitting here reviewing the document and trying to come up with our thoughts all at the same time, you're going to have some very high emotions. So if it's possible for that item to be released prior to the meeting so that people can review it and be informed when they come in, and I'm not talking weeks, I'm talking, maybe 24 hours, so that we can come in and we can provide feedback of things that we're unhappy with or happy with, so that over that next 7 days, if any revisions are possible to be made, that you'll have time to do that. So that's a big concern for me. I don't want to have to come in, try to digest it that night, go home and have all these ideas, and then I don't have an avenue to share those with you until the board meeting that you're voting on it, it's too late.
I agree, yeah.
I think when we did the capital project years ago, that was voted down the first time through.
That was with the budget 2 years ago.
And that, I
That was
think,
the whole marketing
the
part.
big reason that capital project was voted down was because people didn't understand.
Right, that's
When
exactly
that
right.
information
Yes.
was prepared in an easy-to-read format, it was posted on the website, it was in the paper, it was all over, people were informed, and then when the vote came back, I want to say it passed pretty much overwhelmingly, when people were more informed. So, to avoid confusion, on the 29th, if that document can be released early, so people can look at it, understand what's in there. If they want to ask questions or somebody they know, they can ask those questions, be informed when they come in. That would be my suggestion. And I also would be a compare of previous budget to proposed budget. I don't know if that's standard or not in the format. I think in years past we've had that. So again, transparency. There's no issues. There's no, oh, you slid $200,000 into that line item and nobody noticed it because we didn't have both documents. I would want to see last proposed so that I can see any line items. And if you have questions, you ask them right then.
You asked if it's possible. It is possible. And I think that should be our goal. I won't make you a promise because I won't know at this point. But it certainly makes a lot of sense as soon as we get that budget put together that we make it available for people to look at.
Again, even if it's just earlier that day, so I have 2-3 hours before I get here to look at it.
Well, and there's those whole emails and stuff that go out to people. As soon as you post something like that, send that mass email to everybody and say, you want to take a look at the budget, here it is, please come to the meeting type thing. The more that is out there, the better we're going to be and the more transparent it's going to look.
Fiona,
Yes.
also, I was going to say, we count on the public that's here to help us with, for example, we know there are always going to be people that vote no.
Yes.
Same as there are always people like Barb that will vote yes. And we cannot campaign for a budget. We're not allowed by state and law. But we count on you, to help us with some positive publicity. I mean, as many people as we're in contact, you're in contact with more, you're in contact with more, and we can get the word out. What happened here tonight, what we're looking for, if we have more input at the next meeting. Larry said if there are questions in between the public sessions or the board meetings, we will be discussing it at the next board meeting too. So we do need, and I was going to say about the booster meeting, if we could urge some more of the people, I know there are many of you here tonight, but if we could urge some more of the people maybe to attend the next board meeting, since we will be discussing it. I mean, that could accomplish.
There's email groups out there. Is this document on the website yet?
No, it's not, but it will be tomorrow.
Could I email you or you email me a PDF so that I could send it out to all of, say, my people that I'm in contact with? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, if you email it to people that normally email you, chances are they have hundreds of emails attached to their emails, then maybe we can get it out, as well as the dates ahead of time, as well as, I mean, just a thought.
There is I'm guessing there's a budget subcommittee that's been formed. Are there any community members on that that can?
On which the budget development committee
Yeah.
dealt. Why administrators, 4 board members.
Why?
Why?
Why aren't there any community
Well,
ones?
that's the way it's set up. I don't know.
That's why it's always been, I don't know.
We've had, in the past, we've had community members on it.
but in the last
Talked
few
about
years it
adding
hasn't.
them.
We haven't in a few
Of
years.
all years to not do it, this was not the one not to include community people.
It hasn't been done in like the last 4 years.
But still, I mean, if there's any way that this
But that's
board is
why
gonna
we're all-
bridge to the
But
community,
we're all here tonight, that's one of the reasons why we're here.
And there are actually more people here tonight to get the word out and help with input than we get by having 1 or 2 community members. And it typically hasn't been more than a couple on the committee. So, yes, we probably should have. Will we next year? I'd like to say definitely, but we're counting on you guys too.
Thank you, Dr. Zacher, for providing an open forum for this good dialogue. I think it's very important. And believe me, I know the tough place that you're in. I just had a couple of questions. Are the budget committee meetings open to the public?
Budget Development Committee meetings?
Yes.
No.
No. Is there a reason for that?
There is a reason. I would say probably to encourage open dialogue on the Board of Education and make sure that information that is discussed doesn't become common information that people believe decisions have been made on.
Okay, understood. Also, I don't expect an answer tonight, but I would like to know the mathematics behind the resulting funding gap of 1.8 million. As I've analyzed the situation, I believe it's much worse than that.
How much?
I believe it is much worse than that.
Okay.
And I'd really like to see maybe the math behind it. Maybe there's something that I'm not.
Okay, if you want to share that with me, certainly I would love to
Maybe
review
we
it.
can even, yeah, we can
Take your-
chat a minute afterwards or something.
Yeah, if you would give me your perspective of it, I would certainly look at it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you again, this has been a great session.
Is there anything else? We can call this meeting to a close. I do thank you. I thank you for your comments. I believe that they were very thoughtful, and you've been helpful to us in many ways. And I would encourage you to stay a part of that process throughout the next several weeks. It's going to change, hopefully it's going to change very quickly now as we put these pieces together and get our first draft budget put together. We'll try to do a better job of sharing that with you, but as I said, sometimes you don't want information to get out until it's a decision because you alarm people unnecessarily. Thank you once again. Have a great
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.